There you go. So if everybody can see two screens, that's it. So you've got me here in the kitchen and you've got this beautiful basket of tomatoes, right? Today we're going to make probably the most, besides cassoulet, the iconic dish of my kitchen here at Tomate is cassoulet is to fall and winter. The tarte de tomate is to summer and late summer. And I always wait until I know that the tomatoes are really great. We started getting hothouse tomatoes couple of months ago, actually. But it was cold. We had a cold May. It was, they just weren't ready yet. So I knew that I wanted to do this mid-month and get it started and walk you through what I do, because there's a few little critical points. It's a simple recipe. The tomato tart is nothing but a beautiful butter pastry. I put mustard usually on the bottom, and then very thick slices of tomatoes. That's one of the tricks. And then baked until it's all just sort of like a jammy consistency. That's the basis for the tarte de tomate. You can do lots of other things, and if I have time, I'll do another version. But I wasn't sure how it was going to work out time-wise, so I'll hold that in reserve. But I've got a big variety of tomatoes, and as always, when we're talking about a recipe, it's about the ingredients. So the first thing you have to do is look at these, these tomatoes. This tomato weighs just under a kilo, which is it's about 2 pounds. And this one, which I have on the scale, is it actually weighs a kilo and 200 grams. So it's about over 2.5 pounds for one tomato. And these are tomatoes grown on farms in dirt. They're not fancy hothouse tomatoes. I also have some Roma tomatoes, which we would use for sauce. And they are for confit, cutting these in half and baking them until they've sort of not evaporated. And then these beautiful yellow tomatoes, which they refer to them as pineapple tomatoes, but because of the color. But actually, as you can see, this is that same cœur de boeuf shape, and this is a proper cœur de boeuf. It looks just like a heart. And it's one of the things I wrote about this week to explain how these are very, very thin skinned, but very meaty tomatoes. So when I saw the yellow ones, and I bought all these from one farmer that I buy, they are organic, or in the process of becoming organic. They've been working for 2 years going organic. They have a farm along the banks of the Baís River, and they pick just as they need to bring things to market. So I know that all their produce has this freshness about it, and it's not been hanging out in cold storage. It hasn't been refrigerated. And if you don't know the difference, when you get a tomato that's been refrigerated, you'll be disappointed. So these came right from their fields. I've got parsley and some tarragon and some thyme. So let's just make a little space over here. And we're going to make the pastry first. Now, if you've been following along with me the whole year, you know that, in fact, there's this amazing tomato. I just love it. You know that, making an all butter crust is one of the mantras. And you can see, as often as I do it, it makes it easy to prepare. I don't have to think too much about it because I make them all the time. Sweet ones or savory ones, or in the tart shell, or as a galette folded over. Little individual ones, big ones for parties, square ones, round ones. So it doesn't really matter, but you just make that pastry so often you don't even think about it. Or if you are all thumbs and you're not confident at all, but I hope you will try by the time you come through with this with me, you can buy a really good butter pastry and make this. And that was the sort of the genesis of the tarte de tomate for me when I was working on the boat. Is I had my first mate, John Corbin, who would hold down the fort while I took my guests off to go wine tasting. And I said to him, there's a rolled up pastry in the refrigerator, slice it, put some mustard on it, put the tomatoes on it, put it in the oven half an hour before I get home. And that was how simple it was. And even John could do it. So it became sort of our go-to thing. So I'm going to make the pastry the same way I do all the time. You just go ahead and for a tart shell about this size, which is, oh, I know it's like 28 centimeters, but it's not quite. Maybe it's 10-inch. That one's a little larger. So yeah, this one's 10-inch. I'm gonna use 250 grams. I think 200 grams of flour, about 2 cups of flour is about what you're gonna use. And because I do it by weight, you know, the basic is 50% flour to the amount of 50% fat, butter to the amount of flour. So that's 200, a little over 200. That's 250. So that means I want 125 grams of butter. 250 flour, 125 grams of butter. This is 250. And I can just go ahead and cut that in half. Yep. 123, so just enough. And then I'm going to add in a pinch of salt. And just take this down. And as I usually just do with my hands, I'm going to cut these into chunks. You can see it's quite soft, actually. The butter came out of the refrigerator, but it's warm in the kitchen here. Just mix this up. And again, I just sort of going over this quickly because I've showed you this a number of times. But if you're making one along, what I do is I throw these pieces of butter between my thumbs and my fingers. So you've got these little chunks of butter, and let's see if I can get it up close enough. And you just sort of smash them off of the front of your fingers. And what that does is it gives me these little flakes. So a pâte brisée, which is what this is means broken up. The butter is broken up. A pâte sablée is when the butter is fine like sand. And so you might you would mix it more. And then that's, you know, people who like to use a food processor, a mixer, will get that more fine texture. But I like this these flakes and different sizes of butter so that when I'm rolling it out, it's going to become flaky in the crust. Okay, that's all we have to do. It's about, there's no big pieces in here. And with a ratio of 50% butter to flour, you don't need a lot of liquid. And I always use an egg. So sometimes that egg is enough for me. So this is nice and loose. Let's see if I can get a closer. You come up here without moving it all over. You can see it's sort of a rough texture. There's different sizes, clumps there. And because I'm also going to use an egg after I've rolled it out and put it in there, and I'll tell you about, I'm going to go ahead and break 2 eggs into this bowl. It'll just be easier to have that, and I don't have to do it twice. The egg with the feather still on it. And let's see. Just to break up the yolks and the white a little bit. And let me get a little bit of water because I didn't prep that yet. You know, Chica is usually my helper, but I put her in her crate because she was going crazy earlier. All right, let's just make a well in the middle of this. Add about half of the eggs. So that's 1 egg. The other half will keep for brushing. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of water, like a big serving spoon of this water as well. And then mix this all in. You know, I baked for many years, even as a kid with, you know, Betty Crocker and Duncan Hines and all the mixes. I always liked to bake those things. But it wasn't until I started making pastry that I realized you get a lot of, you get a lot of bang for your buck. You get a lot of tension when you make a really nice pastry crust for a pie or turnovers or all kinds of things. And it's worth learning to do because there's nothing tastes as nice as a homemade pastry. And you don't have to put very much in it. So that's just sticking enough here. You can see it's just coming up. And all I have to do with my hands is pull it, make a little ball. It's working very easily for two reasons, or three reasons. One is warm, and that butter got soft very quickly at this room temperature. I know there are all kinds of reasons why people work with very cold ingredients for pastry making, butter in the freezer, flour in the freezer, bowl in the freezer. Believe me, when it's 85 degrees out, that's not going to do much good. You've got to work fast. And so I learned to work fast. The other thing is I use enough liquid, and the egg and the water makes this quite soft. So you can see, I'm going to do a little, you can see just how soft that pushes in. And it shouldn't be too dry. I think one of the things that happens is that people end up making it was my case. I certainly, when I was younger and just learning, my pastry was so dry, it was always falling apart. I couldn't roll it out. And so it wasn't any fun to make. And what I'm going to do is just put some flour on the board. And I think I'm going to go ahead and use this bigger pan here. So this is about a 10-inch. And we'll go ahead and just make this into press it. You can see some people are freaked out about doing or using a rolling pin. You can just press this into a pan. It's soft enough to do that. It's almost like a cookie dough, but I want to make it even. And so I'm going to go ahead and just roll this out. I'm not worried about putting a lot of flour over it because it's a very wet dough, so it can absorb a little bit. And you can see that it slides around on the board. I'll move my rolling pin. I use this little French pin. Instead of just going back and forth, I can move it all around, so I'm getting an even. And I can tell if it's sticking because then it won't move. If it's sticking, I just move my pastry scraper underneath there. And then I want to make sure that I know I have this is big enough for the bottom, but I have to come up to the sides a little. So I need just to go out a little bit thicker. And I'm going to do that from the edges and let that middle center be a little bit thicker, because one of the problems with a tomato tart is it can be juicy. It's actually not a problem. It wants to be that way. Now, this little trick, just use the scraper, make sure it's not sticking, roll it very gently so it's the weight of it's not going to stick to the board or the pin. Put your tart shell right in front, and then just lift this up and let it go down and across. And then lift your edges so that you get the pastry to be all in the corners. And this is one of those very sharp French tart pans without a lip. which is nice because you can do a lot of different things with that, but it also can cut through this. You like see there, it could cut through very easily. So you just want to be gentle, press that all the way around the side. And because this is, again, I want a little structure to this edge rather than cutting it off, I'm folding it over. Let's see if you can see my process there, and then just push it down. And remember I did that just a little thinner on these edges, so it's nice. It won't be too thick. I kind of don't think there's anything as too thick pastry anyway. Okay, so once we get this all the way down, then I just make sure I've got my corner fairly sharp and go around so that there's an angle to the inside of this. I'm not so worried about this top, what it's going to look like. The other part about making a tomato tart, that there are American recipes for tomato pies with a top on them as well. But I think the thing about this French tomato tart is that, like always, tarts are about layers. So this is not very deep. This tin is only maybe an inch. It's a couple, 2.5 centimeters maybe deep. So what we're going to do now is brush it first with the egg. And what that does is it helps seal the pastry so that it's not going to get too soggy from the tomatoes. And I put enough on here and let it dry. You can let this dry. You can put it in the refrigerator if you want while you're doing other things. Go ahead and come up the edge of the crust as well. So that forms one barrier that's going to help keep it from being soggy. But the other thing that really makes another barrier is the mustard. So I went to the farm store, and at my farm store, well, you can do amazingly, you can get this really fabulous mustard from Burgundy, the Edmond Fayot company. They're like one of the last sort of family-owned artisan mustard companies. And I'm just going to go ahead and let's see. I'm gonna take a good tablespoon, fat tablespoon out, and look like the same color as that. And then I'm going to brush it over the egg. Now, in a perfect world, I would maybe let that egg dry before I did this, because I'm carrying on with showing this to you. I'm just moving it on top of the surface. It's fine. And this is going to form a nice thick layer. It's for flavor, but again, it's also to keep the juices from penetrating and sort of forming an inside crust to the pastry. So that's all you have to do. And you can let that sit. You could refrigerate it, or you could let it sit while you prepare the tomatoes. So we're going to do that real quick. Just make a little extra room here. All right. Now with these tomatoes, I want to show you, let's see what these yellow ones look like. They'll be really beautiful. But one of the things about the cœur de bœuf, which means ox heart, not beef steak, but beef heart, and is that they are this perfect heart shape. And I'm going to go ahead and just cut the stem. I'm not going to peel these because the peel is what's going to help hold this together. And I listened to the farmer who grew these explain to, there was a kind of a young guy in front of me buying things to barbecue. And he wanted vegetables, an aubergine, eggplant, and various things that he could barbecue this weekend. And he wanted some tomatoes. And so the farmer explained to him, this is Pascal, that what he wanted to do was to slice them, not in rounds, but lengthwise. And I thought that was so funny because that's exactly what I do. And one reason was is that when you slice them around in the rounds, you're going to get all the juices that run out. And if you're grilling them, or in this case, we're putting them on the pot, on the tart. So what he suggested, and what I do as well, is that I slice them this way. So I'm coming down this way. And I'll go ahead and the other thing is, and probably the most important part about all this, is you want these to be really thick slices. If you cut thin slices like you might for salad and put this, your tart's going to be too thin, or you're going to put too many layers, you're going to get all that juice. By keeping these really thick, meaty layers, like one layer, then you're not going to have as much juice running out. So what I do is I, look at the depth of your tart shell, which is like to there, measure that. And then I can come in and let's say I'm going to start with that one. That'll just give me a little, to get started so I know I have my eye. This is easy to cut them too small. So nice, big, thick slices. And you can see how this shows here that there is, there's just one little spot there, which I'll take out. My homegrown tomatoes are a mess. We've had blight, so I'm so grateful I have really good neighbors who grow these. So you can see here that there's only this little bit of, I think it's called the locular space where the seeds and the jelly around is in there. If you slice it this way, you would be getting it all through. But actually in the Cœur de Bœuf, they don't have as much, it's more of a meaty tomato, so there's not as much space inside, which is perfect. Let's go ahead and just trim that little stem off. If you don't trim it, it sort of stays hard. It's not as nice. And then go ahead and do these as well. It's nice to have a good sharp knife. I'm not a knife geek like a lot of people are. I like these little Spanish knives. This is actually a Spanish knife too. The big one I'm using is Arcos is the brand. They're well made and they're not as expensive and they sharpen really well. And then I love these little, these are Polaris from, made with a boxwood handle, and they make stainless steel ones now, but they're usually carbon steel. So I have these slices. Let's see how many are we going to fit in here, and maybe we'll do this yellow one too. Same way. Oh, that's beautiful. Wow, that was a surprise. That little pink going all the way down through the middle. Okay. So you see when we place these in the pan, in the tart pan, I'm going to go ahead and put them around the outside, the heart shape. They're just like perfect to go in a circle. And you can see that there are, I'll show you a little bit more as we get this. They're exactly the same height of the of the pastry itself. Let's see, do half of one here. Fit in. It's a sandwich coming up, a tomato sandwich. And then I think what I'll do with this, because it's so beautiful on the side, let's stem out a little bit more. But in order to not have any spaces, because you really want this full, go ahead and cut up some pieces and push them right so that everything, the entire surface is covered. The entire surface of the pastry is covered. When they cook, this will all cook down. Okay. That one in the middle. There's nothing wrong with sort of poking these in. And let's do the same thing with the red ones. And this will fill in any space around. Also fills in that bit of where I had to trim the stem out as well. I think one of the funny things about the cooking with wine video, when I first saw the first rough cut, is they have music behind everything. So it's like I'm cooking to music through the whole thing. It's really lovely, but it's like, you can hear how quiet it is in here. I never have music on when I'm cooking. I don't like that soundtrack. I like to have my head really focus what I'm doing here. These off to the side. Okay, so we have now the tomato tart, and I want you to take note that the tomato and the pastry are at the same level. So you see how it's right up to the top. It's right up to even a little over on here on this one. You can see that it's like working backwards. Okay, so that is really the trick in this, is put that egg wash on the bottom, put the mustard on the bottom. That's going to help protect the pastry from getting too juicy. Use tomatoes that are also not full of water. If you're buying hothouse tomatoes or hydroponic tomatoes, are going to be really watery. So you might want to cut them and put them on some paper towel or a tea towel, let them drain a little bit. But I never do with these. It's one of the reasons I wait until I get these tomatoes at this time of the year. And then cut them nice and thick. That's the other thing. And now all I'm going to do is salt them a little on the top, as the salt will just bring out that sweetness of the tomatoes. And I'm going to use, I have some olive oil that I'll use at the end. I don't put it on now, but at the end, if it starts to dry a little bit, I'll brush it with olive oil. So we'll just have that ready with our brush. You can use some capers. I love capers. Somebody said, can I use? I said, you use whatever you want. You can use, I love anchovies and anything. Salty and with the sweetness of those really ripe tomatoes is perfect. You could use goat's cheese, which I do sometimes, some of those. So just a few capers around here. You could use all kinds of other things, but don't make it a pizza. Just keep it really simple and basic. And I have some thyme, some fresh thyme, so I just will brush it. If you use dried, like herb de Provence, it's going to be little hard pieces of cardboard. So use a fresher. These are just been picked and gathered. So, okay. And of course, we can also use some pepper, because We like pepper. So salt, pepper, thyme, capers. That's what I'm doing with this sort of classic. And we're going to pop it in the oven. The oven is at 200 degrees Celsius, or 410, 415. So nice hot oven on the convection oven. And this isn't going to spill out, but if you're worried about that, you can put it on a sheet, cookie sheet. You want to make sure that the bottom is going to get really done. So we're going to put this in for 25 minutes. And more toward the bottom. And then we'll check it to make sure. You can always, I think one of the things, people always pull things too soon. They think, oh, it's done. Just leave it another 5 or 10 minutes. It's not going to go anywhere, unless it's burning, obviously. So we'll put this on for 25. I think this oven seems to run a little fast than my other oven. So I'm finding I've got about 5 minutes, save 5 minutes on cooking time, which is great. So that's really the basic for the tarte de tomate. And I've done it. Of course, you see lots of photographs. I'll go back and look at all the archival photographs. And in the cookbook for this month that Elaine put together, she went back and found, I think, every tomato tart that I had ever made. And the olive oil. Let's see if I can do that. So you can see that the edge of the pastry is nice and brown all the way around. And there is some juice. So how close this will show, but not a lot, but enough juice that's in there that if I go ahead and take my egg brush, I'm going to dip it into the olive oil, and then I'm just going to brush this on top. And everybody's always sort of surprised with these tarts that whether it's a savory one or whether it's a sweet one, that they don't get soggy in the bottom. It's because, I think, partly because of the amount of fat and the egg really hold that. And as long as it's cooked all the way through, and you want to make sure, like I know how this is pulled away a little bit from the side, and I can see the edge here without trying to, it's quite nice and brown, like it should be, because it's full of butter. So I know that the very bottom is brown, but if you pull it too soon and that's just barely golden, that is when it can, run the risk of being soggy. But by letting it really cook enough, put it on the lower part of the oven, and then have that higher temperature, that's what's going to make this work. All right. Really, the worst part of all is having to wait for it to cool down a little bit, because this is so molten hot. You couldn't even taste it right now. So I can't give you a taste and see what it's like, but I will take some pictures. And then you want to let this come to room temperature, because it'll set up a little bit. The tomatoes will set up a bit. If I was serving this tomorrow or later, if I did this in the morning, that's our 25 minutes. If I did this in the morning for lunch, I wouldn't refrigerate it. I would just leave it out. Same thing. If I was going to serve this tomorrow, I would just leave it in the oven. I wouldn't put it in the refrigerator. There's nothing that's going to spoil, and there's no protein in here. You have to worry about that. And then it won't get won't get soggy. What I like to do is usually remove the crust out of the pan as well. But with this particular tart pan, I can't do that easily, because of it doesn't have a spring bottom. That would be the other thing you could do is use one with a spring bottom. So that's really where we are. We're finished. 25 minutes in the oven, about 25 minutes to put it together. So you've got time to pour a glass of wine and enjoy it or have a chat with your friends by Zoom, whatever you want to do, and then enjoy it. Thanks so much for cooking with me in my kitchen at Tomate today. A fabulous summer tart de tomate. And I look forward to seeing you in the next videos and online and all the cooking here in a Gasconier.